Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar from the IHS Infinetics team. I'm Joanne Emery. I lead the webinar team at IHS, and I want to thank you for sharing your time. The focus on this webinar is around network security lifecycles, and our panel will be discussing best practices for improving and for validating the performance of security solutions. This webinar is co-produced by the IHS team and our partners Fortinet and Axiom. Just before we start our presentation, I'm going to review some of the features on your console, and then I'll mention how you can participate on the webinar. So first of all, your console can be customized. You can move or resize any of the preloaded windows. You should see the presentation slides right in the center window. You can maximize that view just by clicking the top right corner of the window, and you can click and drag the bottom right corner of this or of any window to resize your screen for your own preference. Also, the slides from this session are available to you for download. So you can access the presentation deck from our resource list, and that resource list is found in the widgets that are running along the bottom of your console. It's a button that looks just like a little file folder. In addition to the slide deck, we also have other material all related to the console. Sorry, we have other material all related to the topic. We have some white papers focused on securing and protecting your network. We also have an e-book with more detail and more insights on Lifecycles. All these materials can be downloaded right from the resource list, so I encourage you to check out that during the session today. And next, if you have any technical difficulty during the session, just click on the Help widget. That's the button that looks like a question mark icon, and we have common answers to technical issues right there. Now some ways you can participate on the webinar. We are going to have a Twitter feed running on the console, so you can easily tweet right from the webinar. We're using a hashtag security lifecycles for this webinar. Next, I do want to mention our Q&A session. So directly following the presentation, we will have live questions with our panel. It's a great chance for you to get specific answers to your questions, and we do encourage your input here. You can use the Q&A box that's located on the left side of your screen. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible during the presentation, during the presentation today, so get your questions in early. Any questions that we can't answer, we'll follow up with you directly. And with those items, now I do want to introduce the panel today. So leading our discussion, we have Jeff Wilson, and Jeff is Research Director for Cybersecurity Technology at IHS. Jeff, welcome.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see such a great group of people on the line.
And we are also joined by Warren Wu, and Warren is Senior Director of Product Marketing at the Data Center with the Data Center segment at Fortinet. Warren, welcome.
Hello, everyone, and great to be here.
Great. And rounding out our panel, we have Keith Bromley, and Keith is Senior Manager for Product Marketing at Axiom. Keith, great to have you today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending. Appreciate it.
Great. And now we'll get the presentation started. I'm going to turn the controls over to Jeff. So, Jeff, to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Joanne. Like I said, welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all on the line wherever in the world you are right now, and I do see people from all over the world on the attendee list. If you're a regular attendee to my webinars, this one might be a little bit of a change of pace. There's no shock and awe, no scare tactics, no huge discussions about the next threat that's going to keep you awake at night, and no next generation architecture discussions. We've been talking a lot lately about SDN and NFV and virtualization. Today we're going to kind of get back to basics, but it's really a topic that's absolutely critical day to day, I'm sure, for everybody on the line here, and something that the three of us speaking today kind of live in, and that is performance, and particularly performance related to your core network security elements, your firewall, right? Now, what we want to talk about and really get a sense of by the time we're done today is, help you figure out how much performance do you really need, what's driving changes in requirements for performance for the firewall and for network security elements, and how and when should you be measuring that performance to really make sure you're making the right purchases, the right investments, and ultimately providing the best level of security for your networks. So with that, there are sort of two fundamental principles I think that we can all agree on. On the left side is the traffic and networks will continue to grow. This is Cisco's global IP traffic forecast from their the Visual Networking Index. But by any tool that you use to measure traffic, the growth is incredible. And just to sort of level set here, Cisco's expecting 72.4 exabytes per month of IP traffic moved this year in 2015. It would take 5 exabytes to encode and store every word ever spoken by every human being on Earth throughout history. So we're already moving 15 times that per month in IP traffic. And looking out to 2019, we're looking at 34 times that amount of data per month moving. It's really a number so big that it's hard sometimes to wrap your head around it. So we sort of chunk performance up into smaller units and discrete problems so that we can deal with them. And one of those discrete problems is performance of your security elements. Networks get faster, network elements get faster, backplanes get bigger, port speeds get higher, and all of that needs to be factored into your decision when you're investing in security solutions, because it's not just the networks that are growing, it's also the threats. Right on the right side, we have total number of malware samples, and through the first half of 2015, we're at somewhere around 400 million samples, and you can see the growth through 2015 in the first half already greatly outpacing 2014, and I think we're going to see that curve continue that we've seen over the last couple of years, that incredible growth. But it's not just the number of malware samples. Things like DDoS attacks crossing the 500 gig line, and probably, there probably have been terabit speed DDoS attacks. In a lot of cases, we just might even lack the tools to measure the size of the attack. 2014, we had over 1 billion individual, personally identifiable records stolen. So any metric that you choose to evaluate and of what's going to tax your security infrastructure from a performance standpoint, the growth is really staggering. So a lot of times we like to look at this problem as an upstream problem. I'll call it that for now. If you're a small business, you say, performance isn't. It's large companies that need to worry about performance. If you're a large company, it's the big data center and cloud hosting providers. If you're a data center and cloud hosting provider, I'm not sure who's upstream from you, maybe the largest mobile carriers. But the truth is, performance is an issue at every stage. Every firewall, regardless of where it's deployed, struggles with performance. Obviously, in the carrier networks, mobile networks, they're wrestling with some huge issues. Explosive growth in mobile data traffic, encrypted backhaul. I didn't even mention in the threat discussion, IoT, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, how much the threat surface is growing as a result of IoT, but really from a carrier network perspective, the potential for traffic growth as a result of connecting, trillions of new devices that are constantly chattering. In the data center, obviously, things that affect firewall performance considerations are the sheer number of connections that need to be supported. Not something that we used to talk about in firewalls, but certainly something that people are discussing now to get to that cloud scale that everyone's looking for. And the need to not just deploy basic security controls in the network, but to look at high performance advanced threat prevention all the way up at those, multi-gigabit, hundreds of gigabits, and even approaching a terabit level for security. But then even on the campus, core campus firewalls are being asked to perform at multi-gigabit speeds and to do more than just stateful inspection and packet filtering to provide a lot of security functions at once. There's a move towards using firewalls and other security elements to securely segment networks, and again, that's going to require your firewall to run at LAN speed and not to slow the network down. And LANs have done exactly that, gotten significantly faster. And even in a remote office or for a small business, People are looking to deploy all of their security in a single box. That means all the packet processing required to provide multiple security functions are coming in one box, and they're budget constrained. They can't afford necessarily the kinds of solutions that you could afford if you're a large cloud or hosting provider. But at the same time, broadband is getting faster. People are getting fiber. It's not uncommon for a small business to have access to gigabit and multi-gigabit connectivity to the internet, and certainly they have fast networks. When you can get a gigabit Ethernet port for $12 or whatever the ASP is now, you can imagine that things like 10 and 40 gig are creeping into even smaller environments. And oftentimes, SMBs are targeted as a weak point, so they end up dealing with a lot of attacks. They're not ignored the way we used to think. So then to go through, some real. So this is all in theory, right? But we do a lot of survey research throughout the year, and this is a question that we asked enterprise security buyers about what drives them to make new investments in security. And here you see highlighted in blue, these are all performance-related drivers. Inspecting encrypted traffic, the advent of the encrypted internet in the wake of the Snowden disclosures means that everyone is dealing with a significant volume of encrypted content on their networks and need the network security infrastructure to have the performance required to terminate, inspect encrypted traffic, and then move it along. But certainly upgrading security products to match network performance is a significant driver. And all the way down at the bottom of the list, near the bottom, I will say, but still critical to 3/4 of the respondents that we asked this question was upgrading to high-speed network interfaces. So a lot of cases, people are just, they've deployed 10 gig, 40 gig, and even sometimes 100 gig ports, and they need uplinks in their firewalls to connect to the switches. Also, so in the enterprise, again, we look specifically at, all right, so you need faster ports. What exactly do you need? And here, looking out at 2017, half of these enterprise respondents said they're going to need at least some support for 100 gig ports. And on the throughput side, what really tells all the story is only 1% think that their fastest firewall is going to need to be less than 40 gigabits. And a significant number of core enterprise buyers looking at firewalls in the 40 to 200 gig range, almost half of the respondents. So this mainstream need for hundreds of gigabits of throughput and 10, 40, 100 gig, and maybe 25 gig ports as they become available across their firewalls, causing this refresh that's happening right now. And it's not just enterprise. Obviously, cloud providers, hosting providers face a lot of these same challenges, but just magnified. So here's the same data set. This was, 26 of the largest, most well-known cloud and hosting providers around the world. Same questions. What's driving you to make new investments? This time, for the cloud providers, sessions becomes the top issue. They need solutions that support more total, more concurrent sessions. They're dealing with a lot of session setup and teardown, massive session scale required. And that's a change that a lot of firewall vendors have really focused on in the last 5 years or so, supporting 10, 20, 50 times increases in the number of sessions they support. But also improving aggregate throughput, upgrading network interfaces, the same performance-related issues. And when we asked about ports and throughput, again, it's the same story, but magnified. Today, there are 2/3 of the cloud providers that we interviewed said they require firewalls in the 200 gig to 500 gig range, and already 40% have deployed 100 gig ports. So the need for these massive speeds and ports is here right now. But it's worth having, maybe a more nuanced discussion about what performance really is, because, throughput, has been kind of the measuring stick to date. But really it's about a lot more than that. So when you're looking at measuring performance, there are a lot more questions than what's the total throughput for stateful inspection that you need to ask. Do you have performance requirements that are going to change based on packet size? What kind of traffic are you moving? This is a critical question that you need to ask. And if you've looked at many test results for firewalls, performance can vary significantly based on packet size or latency latency requirements. And we're moving to more and more real-time applications, audio, video. How important is latency, and is your firewall getting in the way because it's injecting latency? What about connection performance? Do you, in this mobile world where everyone's got multiple devices, we have a lot more sessions set up and teardown. How important is improving connection performance? We talked about SSL, but can you deal with this volume of encrypted traffic? You look at some service provider traffic samples, and we're rapidly approaching 50, 60, 70% of all traffic being encrypted as more and more home name brand web properties encrypt by default. What about additional functions? Layering intrusion prevention. Are you running VPNs on your firewall? Are you doing advanced threat prevention? Content security, antivirus filtering, anything else that you're doing is going to affect the performance of the firewall. And then this doesn't even get into the discussion of is there a performance metric for efficacy? How well is your security solution performing from the standpoint of catching actual threats, right? But the most important thing is firewall performance has to match network throughput and has to support new port speeds. Otherwise, the firewall is getting in the way of the goal of all of these networks, which is connecting and sharing information, and it cannot be a roadblock. Otherwise, people will find ways around them. And finally, and Keith is going to talk about this in great detail, is that validating performance isn't a static process. We tend to think of figuring out what we need once, maybe doing some capacity planning for the future, and then you're done. But really, there's a lifecycle approach to understanding your performance requirements that's important throughout the life of the product. All right, so that's the end of my spiel. I'm going to pass it to Warren now, and Warren's going to talk a little bit about some architecture trends that are driving this, this need. Why do we need 200 gigs or 400 gigs of firewall performance as a mainstream buyer, or a terabit as a cloud provider? What's going on with networks that's driving needs for higher performance? So Warren?
Great. Thank you, Jeff. So Jeff talked a little bit earlier about a lot of the trends that are happening that are increasing network utilization, such as mobility, cloud computing, Internet of Things. But to look closely at what's really driving network security architecture, as well as that increase in security performance, let's also take a closer look at the threat landscape. So as we look at the breach incidents that are occurring in the news almost weekly or daily these days, as well as some of the leading breach reports, such as the annual Verizon report that just updated recently, what we see is a disturbing pattern that the number of incidents as well as the amount of damage just continues to increase. But, as we look more closely at these attacks, although we talk these days a lot about advanced threats, what's very interesting is that the way that the hackers are getting into the organization are often anything but advanced. In fact, if you look at the ways they're getting in, still often some of the same tried and true, fairly unsophisticated techniques like email phishing. And the reason is because those things continue to work. People continue to click on those and fall for those social engineering techniques. So, the result of that is that in the majority of cases, 60% of cases, the attackers are actually able to get into the organization, breach that perimeter within a matter of minutes. But what's really interesting is that once they're inside, it's often typically 6 months or even more before the breach is actually discovered. And what's happening there is that once they get inside, these hackers are often presented with really kind of a flat and open and collaborative internal network with very little internal security controls. And so they're able to take their time and spend many months probing the internal network, spreading laterally to find the assets and data of value and interest, and then ultimately to extract those and send those out out of the border as well. So the real lesson here is that the border security approach is really no longer sufficient. The hackers are getting in, again, very easily and within minutes. What's really needed now is to look at the internal network and no longer treat that as an open and trusted network. So, how do we deal with that, and how do we detect these advanced threats more quickly and easily? So what we see then is that network security in the enterprise campus and in the data center are now looking to migrate from the edge or perimeter into the internal network. In the data center, what we see is that the firewalls are now really often being deployed more at the data center core network. When you put them there, you get a lot more internal visibility into the threats, as well as the ability to provide some granular segmentation of your network. But the net result of that, though, is that now you're processing and seeing a lot more of that internal traffic, which is often many-fold the amount of traffic that's actually going out the edge to the WAN or to other networks. And that's what's then often driving that multiplier effect that is driving the need for security throughput from the tens of gigabits often to hundreds or even terabits performance, as Jeff showed in the survey slides. And that's also where you see the network interfaces, that kind of bump of the majority moving to the 40 gig and 100 gig connectivity is really happening at the core network, and the need for the firewalls and network security to be able to plug into those next generation network architectures. Also, when we talk about things like latency, whereas on the WAN we often talk about latency in the tens or even maybe hundreds of milliseconds, when you're sitting in line with data that's passing through your network core, any delays are going to have a ripple effect on all of your business and productivity internally. So you're really wanting to keep latency very low, often measured in the microsecond range. Now, even someone taking this even further, trying to push the firewalls and security even deeper into the network, maybe even down to the access layer of the network, or the also known as the top of rack switches. And there you can see that you can get even greater internal visibility, but again, you're increasing the amount of traffic and performance that you need to deal with. Another limitation of trying to get down there is that with the kind of typical layer 3 or gateway mode that 99% of firewalls are deployed these days, that does require reconfiguration if you're deploying into an existing network, and that can be quite disruptive. So often pushing down through the access layer is really better for a brand new data center or architectural refresh, or to be used selectively where you can deploy it. So with some of those challenges in pushing even deeper into the network, what we're starting to see also is another big trend that we call the internal segmentation firewall approach to provide more visibility and more segmentation in these flat open networks. One of the keys to the internal segmentation firewall approach is to use a more layer 2 or transparent mode of deployment to easily push the firewalls all the way down to the access layer and go in line, but transparently with all of your network uplinks, and therefore be able to get that greater visibility down closer to your workloads and your servers and your data. Now, as you can expect, again, pushing all the way down to that layer, you're going to have a lot more control, often able to segment a very fine honeycomb across your network. It's a great complement to either an edge next-gen firewall in your campus or to an existing data center core firewall. But again, that increased visibility comes at the expense that you have to deal with, again, a much higher throughput. You, again, are seeing higher interface speeds and often the need for very high port density as well in this case to be able to basically transect all of those access layer uplinks. So it's a great way to get visibility, but often, again, you're dealing with many times the amount of traffic that today you're often dealing with when you're just securing at the edge or the perimeter. Now, to deliver better performance, network security architecture is also evolving at the device or board level as well. So those who have been around IT for decades may remember that the original firewalls and intrusion detection and network security were often delivered as software initially to be installed on a general purpose server. This is the easiest way to develop security by allowing the general purpose OS to do a lot of the, say, packet processing so you could focus on the security engine. But over time, there has been a lot of good innovation to get more and more performance. One of the key things is to try and offload some of the repetitive tasks, such as network packet processing, to more specialized chips or ASICs that can now allow the CPUs to focus more on some of the deeper content inspection and deeper visibility and insight. There's further innovation now with that instead of just offloading things like the packet processing is something called optimum path processing, where you're actually maybe able to offload entire sessions, such as a layer 2 or layer 3 firewall session, entirely to these ASICs, thereby freeing up even more of the CPU cycles to be able to do that deeper and deeper inspection and to be able to have visibility across your entire network. So there's a lot of evolution in both the deployment of network security as well as in the engineering of the devices themselves. So next, I'm going to pass it on to Keith from Axiom.
Thanks, Ward. Hello, everyone. I wanted to step back and take a look at the big picture here for a minute. So one of the biggest challenges for IT staff today is to get the proper network information they need, when they need it, so you can make informed decisions about network security and problem resolution. Proper network visibility is the solution. For instance, without this visibility, how do you know if you've been breached? If you have been breached, what was affected? If you need to fix something, and there's always something to be fixed, where do you start? With the proper network visibility architecture in place, you'll be able to see what is and what is not happening on your network. One of the most beneficial practices that our customers have found is to integrate your security architecture with the visibility architecture. Organizations often treat these areas as silos, which starts a cascade of problems like process failures, blind spots, you can miss critical data, and then there's delays in problem resolution that often result. Once you combine the security architecture with the visibility architecture, you'll equip yourself with the necessary tools to properly visualize and diagnose the problems on your network. You should be able to realize these three benefits: better data to analyze security threats, better operational response capabilities against attacks, and the application of consistent monitoring and security policies. Remember, the key is that by integrating the two architectures, you'll be able to improve your root cause analysis. And this isn't just for security problems, but for all network anomalies and general performance issues that you often encounter. Another best practice is to implement the concept of a lifecycle approach to security. Just as the seasons change during the course of a year, your network has different needs and attributes during the four main lifecycle stages of its usable life. From a network equipment deployment perspective, there are typically 5 distinct phases: pre-deployment, usually in a lab; installation and commissioning, where the equipment is installed and turned up in the production network; the production network, which is the steady-state operational phase for the equipment in the network; software and hardware upgrades, which is the change management phase; and end of life. Since end of life doesn't really pertain to our discussion, we'll leave it out and only focus on the other 4 phases. There should be nothing radically new here for you. The only new concept should be that each of these phases has distinct activities associated with them. All too often people forget or dismiss that concept. Once they do, they start to miss activities and steps which create architecture vulnerabilities and performance problems. Let's go into the details in the 4 stages now so that you can get a better understanding. As I just mentioned, each of the stages has a separate contribution to overall network security. This is indicated here in the blue text. During the pre-deployment stage, you're trying to validate whether your solution will solve all of your requirements. The purpose of the installation and commissioning stage is to check that the final solution setup is deployed correctly for your network. The production stage is concerned with constant monitoring and testing for aberrant behavior. And the last stage, upgrades, is focused on testing any changes before you introduce them into the network. Basically, you want to prevent as many self-inflicted injuries as you can here. So let's jump into the first stage, pre-deployment. One of the most important things you'll ever do is test the security of your system. It's one thing to add components to your network. It's another to actually know that they are working correctly. We all know it takes some effort to really test a system. And yes, I just heard everybody groan. However, there's actually equipment out there, like what Axiom makes, that can drastically reduce the amount of time you spend on the task. But in the end, it does take some effort. Make no mistake, though, you stand at least a 20% chance of your network being attacked. This number goes up with various variables like the size of your company, geographic location, whether you use a cloud network, what industry you're in, and various other things, which all increase the probability to up to a 60% chance that you will be attacked. This means that there is a very good chance that if you don't test your network, someone else is going to. Someone who doesn't have your same altruistic intentions at heart. As you can see here, there's 4 primary activities you'll want to investigate as part of the pre-deployment phase. First, how well do your security components actually perform? Data sheets often have idealistic performance figures, so you'll want to know the truth. Then, tune your network based upon component performance. Maybe you need more components, a different vendor's product, or altogether different components now. And lastly, test the network against various threats like DDoS, port scans, etc. The second stage of the life cycle is the installation and commissioning phase. This phase is primarily focused on ensuring that the architecture you designed is actually implemented correctly. According to the McKinsey Institute, 50% of IT projects deliver less value than what was expected. In fact, 17% of the projects failed so bad that they threatened the existence of the company. This means that lots of designs created by engineers and architects, which they thought were perfectly correct, actually ended up failing when they were installed into the live network. With a security architecture, you can't afford a failure like one of those. Since this phase is the proving ground for your design, it needs to work, and it needs to work well. Once it's working correctly, then you'll need to make sure your processes are ready. Best practice is to create several baselines, including an architecture baseline, an incident response plan, a business continuity plan, and even a general investigation or remediation plan. You'll also want to capture details about the baseline performance of the network so that you can have objective figures for future use. That way, when you receive complaints about network performance in the future, you can either validate or invalidate those claims and have a better idea of what and where to troubleshoot. The third stage is the production network and is the steady state phase for your network's lifecycle. This phase enables the real-time vigilance you will need to keep your network protected. This is also the primary phase during which your network will be attacked. One of the biggest benefits that our customers have seen is the ability to respond faster to anomalies. In fact, several of our customers have been able to decrease their mean time to repair by up to 80%. This applies to both security threat remediation and general network performance problems, and mainly results from the ability to get clear network data to help pinpoint problems and their location on the network. As you can see here, there are several different options that can be included in your visibility architecture. Inline solutions are typically needed for high-performance security monitoring and will be your first big decision. The next decision revolves around out-of-band security and monitoring components for tool and network performance. Then, do you need monitoring for your virtual and physical environments, or is it just the physical environment? After that, do you want to take advantage of automation capabilities? Also, do you need Layer 7 application information? Most monitoring solutions only deliver Layer 2 through 4 packet data, so Layer 7 could be very useful, again, depending upon your needs. And then you need to pick the right monitoring tools to support your security and performance needs. The last area is the upgrade stage. This is definitely an important phase, though. While the production phase is where you will be attacked the most, this phase can be attacked as well. You've already validated your architecture in the second phase, which was the installation commissioning phase. Any change you make here runs the risk of actually introducing a security vulnerability or a potential performance problem. For instance, some Microsoft patches have actually caused security flaws. At the same time, many products, especially software products, need to be upgraded to combat the latest security threats or to correct design flaws. The key to success here is to validate all changes before you put them into the live network. This includes validating the authenticity of upgrades, architecture changes, and any new devices. You'll also need to validate that all software revision levels are compatible, as this can be an overlooked source of frustration and performance slowdowns. And with that, I'll hand things back over to Jeff now, who's going to lead us in a roundtable about performance use cases.
Excellent. Thanks, Keith. Excuse me. Thanks, Keith, and thanks, Warren. So just to put a little context around this, we want to talk about a couple of specific cases where there were extreme or interesting or unusual performance requirements, and also how the testing or lifecycle approach to performance can be applied in a couple of different environments. And then the first one is really imagining a very, very large content delivery network. There are a few of these around the world, but sort of to give an extreme example of what some of the largest performance problems people are facing are. Here we have a 200 gigabit per second content delivery network. In this case, I think I want to go to Warren and say, when you're dealing with a network of this size, of this type, what are some of the unique challenges you face when you're trying to deploy, configure, or even size the requirement for firewall?
Yeah.
Warren?
Yeah. Well, so Jeff, we're at Fortinet. We're often dealing with a lot of very large SaaS, social media, and internet content providers who have very large CDNs or content delivery networks, and they're often upgrading these due to increased users and traffic. But what's really interesting, with one use case we had, one of the largest providers, is that they were also seeing a change and shift in the mix of their user traffic, namely that move, again, to mobility and smartphone access meant that users were accessing content more 24/7 rather than just at home or in the office. And in addition, at peak times like global events like the World Cup or the upcoming Olympics, they'd have to deal with much higher peak rates as well, hundreds of thousands of new connections per second. So they had to really size and measure for those peaks as well. So this was a key factor in rolling out a new 200 gigabit network, but also it also speaks to what Keith is saying, that over time, as that move to mobility keeps shifting their traffic, that they constantly should be remeasuring and validating that the performance is adequate and make adjustments over the lifetime of that equipment.
Yeah, and I mean that's a trend that's only on the increase, right? I was speaking at a conference last week, and just out of curiosity, I was asking the audience how many people had more than 2 devices with them on their trip, more than 3. Actually, a pretty significant portion of the office that had carried more than 4 devices, individually connected, tablets, smartphones, laptops, to a single conference. And imagine how that problem is magnified in a network like this, in an Internet of Things or Internet of Everything environment, where it's not just the devices people are carrying. So yeah, that does make a lot of sense that you need to measure based on changes, sort of long-term changes, but also interesting your point about event-based changes, right? There are a lot of cases where people could expect traffic to burst. And may or may not be prepared for what happens when there's a world event or a sporting event or whatever it is that causes a massive increase in performance all at once. Interesting. It would be wouldn't want to be one of the people in charge of making sure a network like that stays up 24/7. It must be incredibly stressful. All right, so not on the other end of the spectrum, but certainly another area, another type of network or environment where we see a lot of big-time requirements, and that is in the financial services space. Could be a stock exchange, or could be other financial services. But again, maybe Warren, if you want to talk about what you guys have seen from a performance standpoint, particularly in an exchange environment, driving requirements.
Yeah, well, definitely financial services is really an information-driven industry that moves at the speed of bits, basically. So any latency in a lot of these stock exchange and trading platforms is a big killer. So we often see not only, again, the need for very high performance in these very large networks, but really that need, again, for that data center, very low sub-10 microsecond latency to ensure that the trading and information is uninterrupted.
Yeah, I mean, whole business models have been developed around decreasing the latency of trading platforms. So it makes sense that there is zero tolerance for injecting new latency with a security solution. How about you, Keith? Have you guys been involved in any sort of testing or lifecycle projects in financial services that are interesting to talk about?
Yeah, we've actually had several customers use our breaking point solution to validate component effectiveness for various network products that they've got. In one case, the customer was testing some firewalls only to find out that A, the performance varied across all three vendors in their proof of concept, and then B, none of the three vendors met the performance metrics that they claimed on their data sheets. So now I'm not saying that the vendors were lying, but the tests that they used were not the same tests that the breaking point product uses, which is designed to simulate real-world traffic. In this case, the customer observed values that were 15 to 30% below what the vendors had claimed, and they were able to take that back and actually negotiate further discounts from their vendors.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good, since they probably had to buy
always good to save money.
Well, and because they probably had to increase the capacity as a result of decreased performance, they're probably spending more money over the long run. Interesting, though, that I can particularly see an environment like this where latency is such an issue. And it's not just that latency is an issue because people will be annoyed if there is latency. It's really about real financial losses if there's latency, mistrades. So absolutely critical to make an investment in testing and also validation once the network is in production to make sure that the performance keeps up. Good. All right. So the last one here we'll talk about is just a standard enterprise deployment. And this in particular, we want to look at using solutions that provide visibility in line to give that long view of how performance is running, not just pre-deployment. So Keith, if you want to talk a little bit about, I think this is a deployment you guys are involved in.
Yeah, this is actually a common one for us. So inline monitoring is typically used for real-time network security threat identification, prevention, and or remediation. It can be quite effective when it's located at this point in the network. However, since the components are inline physically with the data stream, this presents a real possibility for performance problems as well. As I mentioned before, though, the key is to simply plan out what you need ahead of time. If you're highly concerned about performance impacts, then you have several options. The first is to pick bypass tap components. These can either be set to fail open or close depending upon your needs. Another option is to purchase packet brokers that are optimized for inline situations so that you can route the traffic effectively and quickly. A third consideration is whether you need high availability designed into the solution. This allows you to maximize system uptime during planned and unplanned component outages. And by planned outages, I mean that you may want to upgrade software and or hardware components while your network still continues to run. You should be able to realize three key results, though, with the inline visibility solution. Maximum availability for inline security, zero impact for upgrades and changes, and seamless growth and flexibility.
Excellent. All right. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I was going to hand it back to you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I want to remind everybody on the line right now that we will be doing live Q&A at the end. So if you haven't submitted questions yet, please do submit your questions now. You have a few minutes to think about while you have the three of us on the line what you might want to ask. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it back to Warren and Keith to talk about specific solutions that both Fortinet and Ixia offer for just a couple of minutes before we get to the Q&A. So get those questions rolling and take it away.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Ixia, Ixia is a leading provider of application performance and security resilient solutions. We offer solutions to help you validate, secure, and optimize your network. And here's what we mean when we talk about application performance and security resilience. Application performance is about successfully deploying applications across the network so that customers enjoy a high quality of user experience. You can also see some of the key components here. So validating network functions in pre and post deployment environments, and then ensuring service level agreement compliance and so forth. Resilience is really about being able to respond to an attack or a breach. Unfortunately, network security attacks they're a fact of life. However, once something occurs, you want to be able to recover as fast as possible and mitigate as much damage as possible. And we can help you with that. You can see a list of things here where you can simulate real-world attacks, deliver the real-time intelligence you need to respond, harden the resiliency of critical security components, and help train cyber warriors for attack readiness. And with that, I'll hand it over to Warren.
Thank you, Keith. Here at Fortinet, as one of the leading global providers of network security, we are leveraging the latest in both ASIC technology as well as techniques like optimum path processing to deliver the increased performance that organizations need. With our scalable architecture, we're able to deliver solutions from the smaller enterprises, SMBs with UTMs, all the way up to the enterprise data center, firewalls and internal segmentation approaches, all the way up to the large carrier and cloud networks. Customers rely on us for three key benefits. The first is very fast, that we are able to deliver performance at 5 to 10 times the price performance of many of our leading competitors. Second, that we are very secure. We have our own 200-plus internal FortiGuard threat research team that is constantly monitoring the newest threats and providing the content, services, and security in our customers' FortiGate devices. And finally, third, global, that we provide a consolidated platform that provides not just firewall, but multiple security functions, including intrusion prevention, application control, and next-gen firewalling, all within a single optimized stack. And we often are working very closely with our brethren at Ixia to provide real-world validation and live demonstrations at events like the RSA Security Conference, and also pushing kind of the limits and boundaries of technology. Internet 2, for example, one of the consortium of universities and government research institutions that are developing tomorrow's next-gen network today as they are upgrading to 100 gig Ethernet, for example. We have been able to do some real-world validation that these 100 gig networks can be secured not just by newer firewalls, but also to be able to handle the very large high-volume data sets and traffic that are very unique to this very high-performance network. Okay, back to you, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Warren. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up with some quick conclusions, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. We do have a pretty good list of questions here. So, just to leave you with a couple of key points, the key vectors that drive performance are never going to change. Network performance and the increase in IP traffic is a constant, and growth and changes in attacks that drive the need for higher performance attack detection and mitigation solutions is also a constant. So get out of your mind that someday there's going to be a slowdown in the growth of network traffic or in threats. So then what do? How do you measure performance? It's a nuanced topic, and some of the questions sort of get at this. It's not just throughput. You have to move traffic at network speed, keep up with connection requirements, and apply the appropriate inspection to all traffic without slowdown. And that the measurement of this performance requires a lifecycle approach. It's not just before you buy the product. It's while you're testing it, while it's in production, when you're doing upgrades. Throughout the life of the solution, it needs to be tested and validated. So with that, I'm going to just go right into Q&A, and we'll start with hopefully a fairly easy one, and I'm going to throw this one to Warren, and that is in the slides that I was presenting about firewall throughput and port speeds, why is the firewall aggregate throughput higher than any of the individual port speeds? So Warren?
Yeah, that's a good question, but also a fairly easy one to address. So as you move security, again, from the edge more internally, you're often going to be sitting in front of multiple internal segments. So if you look at a typical firewall device today, the most common port speed is a 10 gig Ethernet. You'll see that each device has, often 8 or 12, and in Fortinet's case, often up to 48 or 60 front panel ports because you have these different segments. So you're actually securing multiple 10 gigabit ports. So a typical device would have a total throughput of, say, 80 gigabits or 100 gigabits or more.
Excellent. Yes, an easy one. Yeah, the aggregate throughput has to take into account all the inputs, not just one single input. All right, so we've got a few questions here about the lifecycle portion of the presentation. So the first is, so does this lifecycle approach actually prevent or aid in preventing breaches? So I'll throw that one to Keith first, and I have a follow-up for it as well.
Okay, yeah, so no, it's not going to prevent a breach, but based upon what we've seen from our customers, it will help you minimize the number of successful attacks and the effects of those attacks as much as possible. Mainly we don't know what is or what is not in your network, so that leads to what is vulnerable, what is not vulnerable. But you and your fellow IT teammates are experts on the network. The lifecycle approach is just a way to organize your best practices in one cohesive plan.
Yeah,
excellent.
And I would also add to that it's the fact that if you cannot maintain visibility, you keep up with traffic, you're not going to be able to inspect for the threat. So ensuring that you can keep up with traffic and also, in many cases, deploy the deeper level of inspection, which become very intensive, allows you to maintain that visibility, which is what's going to catch those threats.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you need to stay ahead of the traffic requirements enough that you're not, and this is a common thing that happens, folks back off on protection mechanisms to increase performance. And if the firewall starts to seem like it's slowing things down, in a lot of cases what that means is unchecking boxes, removing policies, stripping functionality away, and that's really not probably the best solution long term. So it's important to have a view into your performance and changes over time so that you don't compromise yourself in that way. The follow-on to that was, is there a sort of a standard time period that people should look at checking in on performance? Keith?
I don't know of one. I mean, there's lots of different things you can do. There, you can go out to SANS and ISO and look and see what they recommend, and then there's probably more information out there from PCI and HIPAA. But really, security is one of those things you've just got to really plan it out because there's so many variables. What type of equipment, and then some of the other things I was talking about. So inline security, out of band. What type of tools are you deploying? Where are you deploying them? There's a whole lot of variables here that I can't really say there's a time frame. It's just, what is it? Where are you now? Where are you going? And how are you going to get there? Plan it out, and then make sure that you've got your other plans in place. So, you want an escalation plan. Business continuity. What is your business continuity plan? That's going to figure into things here. So you just need to, like I said, look at the processes as well as the product, put it all together, and then what shapes out as a time frame is a time frame.
Yeah, and I would add to that. There's some level of coordination within IT because sometimes increases in traffic will be a surprise, but in most cases they won't be. It'll be due to new application rollouts. addition of new users. And there are a lot of predictable events that can drive increases in traffic, and that's going to require integration between the security team, the IT team, the desktop team, everybody in the network, and endpoint and device and security teams talking to each other to understand what's going on that could drive changes in requirements.
Exactly. Now, one further comment on that, one thing you can do is some of the tools you put into place, you can start doing performance trending, and then by that as well, you can see where potential bottlenecks may come, when in time they may come, because we had one customer who, it was a carrier, and they put an application in their network. They actually, it was a user application that was added, and they didn't think much of it, and they weren't really tracking the number of users, and that app caught on, and the bandwidth just exploded, and before they knew it, I think they actually did. Their network did go down because of the application explosion that happened about 3 weeks after they initially allowed it to be introduced. So yeah, put some tools in there as well, but everybody talking together is those two things together what are going to help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Warren, you might be able to comment on this, but most security vendors are moving towards kind of an app-centric view of the world. So a lot of the security controls delivered, say in a next-gen firewall, a lot of the visibility that they give you is centered around apps, which will help you sort of understand the trends and traffic in your network and be able to apply security controls kind of on a per application basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Insight into applications, users, content just gives a lot more context for security to be more effective. But again, back to our main theme, it really drives a lot more processing and therefore performance requirements to be able to provide that context.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's a slightly different topic. So what about measuring performance in a managed service provider or multi-tenant type of environment? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we get this question a lot, both with managed services and also very much so for your public clouds like your IaaS clouds like AWS, Azure, or from your trusted telco provider. So when you don't own and control the infrastructure, it's hard to do hook up equipment and do benchmarking. What I can definitely say though is that we work a lot with our telco and provider customers to do a lot of benchmarking, even more rigorously than we do for most enterprises, so that they can ensure before they set up these managed services or clouds that they can deliver that performance in that shared multi-tenant environment. And we're often doing that, with Ixia equipment or Ixia's services teams are side by side with us to provide that validation. What that in turn maybe can to translate to you as a tenant though is that to really look for providers who have not only done that testing, but will deliver that to you in the form of quality of service guarantees about that performance. And so to pick and choose your providers based on them being able to translate their testing into performance guarantees for you.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to take one more question here. We do have a few more questions that we and also Ixia and Fortinet have all of the questions. So if we didn't answer your question during the live event, someone will follow up with you. And some of the questions are fairly product specific, so we can handle those offline. All right, so the last one I want to talk about then is, we're sort of recommending this across the board, and I will admit the cases that we talked about were kind of the larger cases, a big content delivery network or a stock exchange, but not everyone is a content delivery network or a stock exchange. So the question is, how can a small or medium business go about validating, measuring performance and going for this lifecycle approach? Are the tools available? Is there a way to do it if you have the pocketbook and the expertise of an SMB, for example? So Keith?
Yeah, so I mean the processes and the procedures talked about here are applicable to any type of company. What you actually implement may or may not be different, again, inline, out-of-band tools and so forth, but the processes are all the same. It's just figure out what you're doing and go forward in a coherent manner. As far as actually testing like that, Ixia, we've got solutions that fit any price point. So we've got a virtual solution that can go in at a very cost-effective price point for medium-sized businesses. And they can use it, and then they can validate the different firewalls, IDS, IPS, hit them with malware, DDoS, and so forth to see how they respond and characterize them. So size of the company, doesn't really matter too much. There's solutions available.
Yeah, and if you're looking for help, because I know in a lot of cases with an SMB, budget's part of the problem, but the other problem is just time and expertise. Talk to your VAR or even your vendor. In some cases, they might have access to tools and support to help you with this problem that you don't have the time or expertise to deploy on your own. Do you have any final comment on this, Warren, before I wrap up?
No, that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass it back to Joanne for the final wrap-up, but on behalf of myself and Warren and Keith, just want to thank everybody for being on the line today. It was a pleasure. And with that, I'll pass it to Joanne.
Great, and thanks, Jeff. And yes, we do certainly want to thank Warren, the team from Fortinet, and Keith and the Ixia team for a great presentation. Obviously, security is always a timely topic, but this is a lot of very good information on the session. And we do also want to thank the audience for joining, sharing your time today. The archive version of this webinar will be available shortly. You'll receive a follow-up email with more information about access to the archive. So feel free to come back, visit this again, or share it with a colleague who you think would benefit from the session. Also, you're going to see a short survey pop up. We would love your responses to that. We look forward to your feedback on this topic and any suggestions you have for future webinars. And we do hope you'll join us again. You can find more webinars available for viewing in our library at the link that's on your screen here. And watch for more webinars from the IHS team coming up on the calendar. So thanks again. That's all for this session. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.